The Nigel Farage Show.
Mr. Nigel Farage.
Thank you, Donald. Thank you, Donald. Good evening, everybody. Well, I'm here in Strasbourg, and the biggest story in Europe this week is not Brexit for once. No, actually, it's what happened on Sunday when, despite the fact there was no agreement nationally from the Spanish government, in Catalonia, they went ahead with their own independence referendum. Now, it was declared illegal by the Spanish government. It was declared illegal by the European Union. But there was a determination amongst some for that poll to continue. And it seems to me, whether it was legal in Spanish law or not, you shouldn't really stop people from going out and expressing an opinion. And yet, the Spanish government, through their police force, did their absolute best or worst, depending on your opinion, to stop people from voting. We saw women being dragged by their hair out from polling stations. We saw the police actually firing rubber bullets. We saw old men and old women with gashes in their head where they've been bashed with batons. Every attempt made to stop that vote from happening. Quite extraordinary violence being displayed by the Spanish police. I would guess for some in Spain, over a certain age, memories of the bad old days of General Franco and all the rest of it. And yet, in what is supposed to be a modern democracy and a member state of the European Union, for them to get their own police to behave like this against their own people, 850 of whom were badly injured. From the European Commission, the bosses of the European project, what have we had? Well, Mr. Juncker said before the protests that the rule of law had to be upheld. And since the reality of 850 injuries, the European Commission's official statement says we must move very swiftly from confrontation to dialogue. Mr. Juncker today was said to be in listening mode, and the Commission called in these times for unity, stability, not divisiveness and fragmentation, by which they mean they disapprove of what the Catalonians want to do. At no point from Mr. Juncker or the Commission or any of our bosses here in Brussels and Strasbourg has there been one word of condemnation about the violence used by Spain's police. And this is how I address Mr. Juncker and the EU Parliament here in Strasbourg this morning.
Mr. Juncker comes here for his one appearance in the Strasbourg session this week, and there is absolutely no mention made of the dramatic events that have taken place inside a European Union member state that is allegedly a modern democracy. Now, one of the reasons that I always wanted Brexit was because I thought the system of lawmaking, whereby the Commission has the sole right to initiate legislation, was something that would in fact damage and in the end destroy any concept of national democracy. And yeah, I've called the European Union undemocratic, I've called it anti-democratic, but never, ever, in my fiercest criticisms here, did I think we would see the police of a member state of the Union injuring 900 people in an attempt to stop them going out to vote. Whether or not it was legal nationally for people in Catalonia to have a vote, surely people are allowed to express an opinion. We saw women being dragged out of polling stations by their hair, old ladies with gashes in their forehead. The most extraordinary display. And what do we get from Mr. Juncker today? Not a dicky bird.
Not a dicky bird. He didn't say a thing. And yet I've sat there in that chamber when, despite the fact it wasn't necessarily on agenda, he's criticised the Hungarian government for refusing to accept migrant quotas. He's condemned the Poles for appointing new judges in a way he doesn't approve of. And can you imagine if the British police beat up a couple of anti-Brexit demonstrators with the EU flag, or if they'd stopped in 2014 one or two of those thuggish types from the SNP who wanted Scottish separation? Can you imagine? Gosh, we'd be hauled straight before the European Court of Human Rights and we would be declared to be behaving like a third world country. And yet, in the case of Catalonia, Mr. Juncker tries to go through the whole debate this morning completely ignoring it. And I'm asking you, do you think I was wrong to criticise Juncker in the way that I did? If you do, call me on 0345 6060 973. Maybe you think it's absolutely fine and dandy for the Spanish police to behave like this, in which case you can text me on 84850 and you can tweet support or criticism for my position by using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC. You can watch us live on Facebook and, of course, comment there too. And I'm pleased to say we're going straight to Spain, and my first caller is Joseph in Alicante. Joseph, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. Nice to talk to you. Hello.
Yeah,
there.
good to talk to you.
Yes. Well, first of all, my name is Joseba. Okay, I was born in London, but I'm a Spanish national, and that's why I gave my name as Joseph, so that it would be easier for everyone to use.
Right.
And
thank you.
Exactly. And answering the question, I think you've got it completely wrong. Now, if you're asking if you're right or wrong, I would say you're absolutely wrong. You have criticised the European Parliament on the one hand, and then you've criticised Spain on the other. So which one would you like me to address first?
Oh, no, what I've criticised the European Parliament for, and in particular Mr. Juncker, is pretending this simply hadn't happened in his only appearance here in Strasbourg this week, when, as, you know, the big boss of Europe, whenever he gives a speech here, he always comments on pertinent European affairs. He chose to ignore this today, so that's my biggest criticism of him.
Okay, we can agree that maybe he should have had a more intense comment in relation to what happened in Spain. But I would like to tackle the issue that you've said that Spain is maybe not a democratic country. I think I've heard you saying. Well, first of all, we are a democratic country, and we have a democratic government who has to abide by the law. By the law, and defend the constitution. I don't know if you know much about Spain's constitution. I don't think you do, but the sovereignty belongs to all the people in Spain, and no one single part of the country has the right to obtain an independence such as the one they're planning on. Now, you could always question if a vote is an option, but for now, that should go through the national parliament, and as long as there aren't the necessary majorities for that, you could argue that it's equally democratic to say, well, why don't you wait, build on the majorities that you need, and there will be a day when a central government might be in power that agrees on giving you a say. But as long as that doesn't happen, we do have a written constitution, not like the UK, and the sovereignty belongs to all the people of Spain.
But how can you, Joseph, how can you, and look, I take your point about the Constitution. I take your point about the legality of this referendum because it hadn't been approved on a national level. However, is it right to stop people who wish to expressing an opinion by using violence?
Well, theoretically, and obviously no one's happy about this. If you ask Spaniards, and you're asking me, and I'm a Spaniard, I would say I'm not happy with what I saw on Sunday because no one likes police using so-called violence, clearly not, and mostly on the elderly, on young people and so on. But that's an issue that derives from a legal decision made by a judge who said there had to be an intervention to stop that illegal vote. So now I ask you, how would you react if a judge tells the British government that they should intervene and stop an illegal protest or march or election? You would rather say, let them do it and therefore be illegal, or would you rather the government abide by the law and do what it has to do? Maybe you prefer the first thing.
Well, Joseph, clearly, if any situation like this happened in the UK, the last thing the British government from Westminster would do is to drag women out of polling stations by their hair. It would never, ever happen. But let me say this to you, Joseph. Let me say this to you very, very clearly. I think the Spanish government have completely bungled it because the truth is that support for separation in Catalonia has really not been higher than about 40% for some considerable time. My suspicion is, given the way the Spanish authorities have now behaved, it'll be significantly higher now than it was this time last week. So not only had the Spanish government behaved appallingly in moral terms by using violence the way they have, albeit to defend, as they see it, the rule of law, but I still believe it to be appalling. But in terms of political tactics, what they've done is a disaster, in my view.
Well, you could agree that maybe politically it has not been handled correctly, and I may not argue against that. But I ask you one question now. If we talk about the protests in the 70s with the trade unions and so on, maybe they had a right to protest. Maybe there was a law that said that there was a moment when that was a challenge to the normal day-to-day life of people, and it was interrupting basic services and so on. So did or did not the government of Margaret Thatcher intervene to stop all of that? Would you have said that was illegal? Was that wrong? Was there use of the force by the police? Do you see what I mean?
Well, there was, but actually, the police used force generally when they were attacked first. And honestly, Joseph, I seriously, I think you're putting up an apologist case for what I think is appalling behaviour, but you're fully entitled to your view. I thank you, Joseph Ralacanti there, backing up the Spanish government's position. And I get it on text. In not condemning the violence by the Spanish people in Catalonia, Juncker, as usual, never says anything useful. When he does speak, it's just drivel. That's what Richard thinks. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC, here in the European Parliament in Strasbourg, and it's 7:15. Over 850 people are injured by Spanish police as they try to vote in Catalonia at the weekend in a referendum that was said to be illegal because it had not been authorised by the Spanish government and Parliament. And I'm saying I can't believe that not only has Mr. Juncker chosen today in the European Parliament to ignore this, but that the European Commission themselves, in their official response, say it's the time for unity and stability, not divisiveness and fragmentation, by which they mean you naughty people in Catalonia. How dare you try to express an opinion? And nobody in the European Union has condemned that behaviour by the Spanish police. Believe you me, if the British police had behaved like that against some anti-Brexit demonstrators, goodness knows we'd never have heard the end of it. David, I think, on Facebook, has got this completely right in my view. He says, you can't tell people that holding a vote is illegal. You can only say the vote has no legal force. Bang on, David. That vote under the Spanish Constitution had no legal force, but to tell people they're not allowed to go and express an opinion, surely this is back to the bad old days of Franco and totalitarianism. Nothing like burying your head in the sand. That'll make it go away, I get on Twitter. And Christiana says, I think what happened in Catalonia was absolutely disgusting. I'm appalled. Peter in Hartford is my next caller. Peter, you've never called the show before. What motivated you?
Hi, Nigel. Thanks for having me on. I think I'm just I am so outraged at what I've seen, and I should say at the outset, I'm afraid I have to be honest. I'm no fan of yours, and I wouldn't be a pro-Brexit person by any means. But moving on from that. I think you have to be congratulated on your comments today in the European Parliament. I think picking up on David's point on Facebook, the Spanish have had the law on their side here. They had absolutely no need to send the cops in. And I think all they've done, to cite a term used by Malcolm Gladwell in his book called David and Goliath, is that they delegitimise their power completely. And I think with reference to the gentleman Joseba who was on first, talking about upholding the Constitution, I mean, as you can probably tell, I'm Irish. There was a recent protest in the streets of Dublin for constitutional reform around abortion. Now, I didn't see any cops out in the streets beating the crap out of, people protesting for constitutional reform in Ireland. Okay, slightly different. It hasn't been declared illegal, but at the same time, to send the cops in as they did is totally undemocratic. And by the way, I've been on the receiving end of treatment from the Spanish police at football matches in Spain. I support Liverpool. I've been over there. They're incredibly aggressive and thuggish even when they get the sense, I think. And the pictures that we've seen on the television are disgraceful. And I think
Yeah, they are.
Mr. Juncker,
they are.
Sorry, if I could just make one more point. I think from Mr. Juncker's perspective, he does have Article 7 in his locker. Now, I know that's a pretty heavy lever to pull, but how can he condemn the Poles and the Hungarians, as you've rightly said? How can he condemn the Poles and Hungarians and not even chastise the Spanish behaviour? I mean, I appreciate the bind that the EU are in at the moment. They have to be anti-separatist. You know, they can't be seen to be supporting the Catalans, especially in a post-Brexit environment. You know, we get all that, but there has to be proportionality in all of this. And for politicians to appear on Channel 4 News, as one of them did last night, and call the response proportionate is absolutely insane.
It's beyond Peter. It's beyond belief. But let me tell you something that I think is an interesting parallel. You talked about Ireland. Let's think about Ireland in 1916, the Easter Uprising, the post office, and all of that, Peter. What was really interesting to me, the more I've studied this, is that when that happened, actually, support for Irish independence was in a minority, okay? And a lot of people were not sympathetic to the uprising. But when they saw the British respond by sending the Royal Navy up the Liffey to start shelling parts of Dublin and then rounding up the ringleaders and shooting them, actually what happened was that view that they didn't want the British, they didn't want London governing them, became a lot stronger. And what I think, Peter, I think the catastrophic mistake that the EU have made by not condemning violence and the Spanish government have made by using it is, I think, Peter, that this week there'll be a lot more separatists than there were last week. Would you agree with that?
Well, I mean, all they've succeeded in doing is, I mean, I don't know very much about the Catalan separatist movement up to now, and from what I understand, you correct me if I'm wrong, it's a wealthy part of Spain looking to get away from paying from the poorer parts of Spain. And really, I have no interest in that. But when I see police on the television beating up elderly people and women and all the rest of it, you know, you can't but sit up and take notice now. And I think it's the lack of humanity, I think, really, on the part of the EU here is unacceptable. I mean, it's one thing to have us Spain, but at an EU level, that's not good enough.
No, Peter, I agree with you. I thank you very much indeed for your call. Will mentioning the violence in Catalonia benefit Juncker's position? If no, then there's your answer. Sorry, that isn't good enough. Is this an indication for future behaviour from the EU against dissenting populations in member states? Asks David in Hereford. Well, David, I can tell you that there are 7 member states who have pressed ahead and have formed a Euro gendarmerie force. They have 900 officers. There are 2,300 more in training, and they are a militarised police force to be used to put down dissent. And when Theresa May was Home Secretary, she was asked in the House of Commons, would she rule out the Euro gendarmerie force ever being used on the streets of Britain, and she wouldn't answer the question. And I suspect that if it's acceptable to Mr. Juncker and the Commission for the Spanish police to behave like this, I actually do genuinely think that at some point in the future there will be rebellions against not just governments but the European Union as a whole, and I think we've seen a specimen of how they might well be treated. Sadar is calling me from Red Hill. Good evening.
Hello, Nigel. Hi.
Hi there. How are you?
Hi. I'm all right, thank you. Glad to hear you to say these words in defense of the Catalan people. I'm from Catalonia. I come from a very small town just in the center of Catalonia, about an hour driving from Barcelona and about 45 minutes an hour as well driving from to the French border. Just the first thing is just a few points. The first one is just to thank you for the words that today you mentioned on the European Parliament. The second point is the manipulation that I don't know if you're watching the Spanish television or you're following the Spanish newspapers, but it's been a manipulation it's ongoing for years and years. They told us that we manipulate the children, we indoctrinate the children in the schools. I've never been indoctrinated in the schools. They never, they always explained to us in the in the history lesson about. Sorry, I'm a little bit nervous. About the.
That's all right. You're doing great. You're doing great. You're making your case. So really, Sarah, what you're saying is that this conflict, in a way, has been building for a very long time, hasn't it?
300 years. I mean, it's coming from centuries and centuries ago. I mean, it's not something that is just after dictator Franco. I mean, my grandparents, they suffered in their own bodies the civil war. The Mossos d'Esquadra, that's our national police, after the civil war, the Guardia Civil, they took them. We had one president, Luis Companys, killed, murdered for the Spanish because his ideas for freedom. We had a very famous musician, Pau Casals, who spoke in the United Nations, and he exposed to the people who we are. I think that we are a very peaceful people. We are fighting just for our rights. We are not against the Spanish. I mean, Spain is a very nice country with a very nice people. I have a very good friends from Spain. And I think that the problem is that we've been just, I don't know, I cannot find the word.
So let me just be clear. So you would like to see Catalonia as an independent state?
Yes. Yes.
And would you, let me ask you this, after the response we've seen from the European Union, would you want that independent Catalonian state to be a member of the European Union?
Oh my God, this is a very difficult question. Because
the European Union, today, the European Union today are saying that if Catalonia goes independent, they can't be part of the EU, thinking that will frighten people from doing it.
They are not doing anything for us at the moment. This is the worst part. I was an European, and if I'm honest with you, I wasn't a good fan of you. But I'm listening to you, and honestly, I'm so pleased because nobody is doing anything for us. On Sunday, we about 150 people in Piccadilly Circus, and I was there, and I saw my colleagues from my country. Just, you know, what that is not something that you can. It's inside of us. I mean, it's part of us. It's part of our culture. I have my language. I speak Spanish. I speak Catalan at home. I have I have 3 children. One lives in Catalonia, and the other 2 are here with us, with my husband and me. We are from there. Our families are from there from, I don't know for how long, centuries maybe. And my grandparents from my mom's side, they come from Valencia, well, Alicante. I mean, let's say half, but my heart is Catalan.
You've got Spanish roots, you've got Catalan roots, but Sarah, listen, I thank you for your call, for the passion that you've expressed, and I think for everybody, listening to you, that is the case for Catalonian independence. It is a peaceful case of a people that want to assert their rights that have been treated pretty bloomin' terribly. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show on LBC, live from the European Parliament in Strasbourg. It's 8:30 here, 7:30 at home. 850 people are injured in Catalonia as they try to go out and express an opinion and vote, and the Spanish police use virtually any means possible, including rubber bullets, to stop them from doing it, and yet the European Union doesn't condemn the violence. Actually, what it says in its official statement is it doesn't want fragmentation. Don't you dare, you Catalonian people. You've got no right to express an opinion, and I'm disgusted by it, and I've said that today, and I'm asking you tonight, do you agree with me that I was right to have a go at Juncker for trying to ignore this issue? Now, as I did a few weeks ago, I promised you that I would try and bring you up-to-date Brexit business briefings, because I feel we're getting too much negativity from the other side. So here is some up-to-date financial news that you won't have heard anywhere else. the United Kingdom has just been ranked as the 8th most competitive economy in the world, ahead of Japan, making this the UK's highest ranking for the last 10 years. On top of that, our position has been confirmed as the 8th largest manufacturer in the world, manufacturing goods worth 185 billion sterling every year, with only Germany and Italy above us in Europe. Interestingly, last year, UK engine production was up by 12%, and 55% of those engines have been sold for export. So perhaps on that, it's no surprise to see that overall, UK exports to the rest of the world last year grew at 12%, double that of our exports to the European Union. And the ever-pessimistic Office for National Statistics have now been made to eat humble pie after their previous suggestion that business investment had stagnated. That has proved to be wrong, as business investment grew in the second quarter by 2.5%. That is the positive, up-to-date economic news. You won't hear a briefing like that on the BBC. Now, politics. I've been having a go at Mr. Juncker. Let's have a look at somebody else now, shall we? Alan Duncan. Sorry, I apologise. Sir Alan Duncan. Sir Alan Duncan, friend of David Cameron's, passionate, in the end, supporter of the Remain campaign. He was speaking in Chicago yesterday, and this is what he had to say, not just about Brexit, but about the people that voted for it.
The manner in which the campaign was fought stirred up a lot of sentiment amongst people who were not habitual voters, particularly on the issue of immigration. And I think you could feel in the last, I would say, 10 days of the campaign, and indeed I've got sort of emails to friends to prove this, that, as I put it, you could feel blue-collar, urban, traditional Labour opinion going viral for Leave. They were stirred up by an image of immigration which made them angry and made them throw a bit of a tantrum. There was a bit of anti-establishment feeling.
So, there you are. If you're listening, if you're urban, if you're old Labour, if you're blue collar, if you're any of those things, or even worse, if you're not a regular voter, I mean, he can't believe that people turned out to vote who don't normally vote, then what you did was you threw a tantrum because you're cretins, you're idiots, you're not as clever as Sir Alan. And I just think, when you think of it, this man is the Europe Minister. Can you believe it? He is the Europe Minister, and he's saying we threw a tantrum in voting for Brexit. Not only is it arrogant, rude, and condescending, but if Mrs. May is to have any credibility as a Prime Minister who said Brexit means Brexit, then she will sack him immediately. He cannot be Europe Minister and speak like that about Brexit voters. Right. I've got that off my chest, and I wonder whether you agree or disagree. And I'm going straight back to Spain. In fact, I'm going to Catalonia. I've got Dennis on the line from Barcelona. Dennis, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. Tantrum idiot phoning.
Yeah, well, there you are.
If only your left arm was a little longer, Nigel, you could have given Juncker a smack across the back of the head this morning. There we go. Go on.
Dennis, before you start on your points, just tell me, what did you see in Barcelona on Sunday?
Oh, chaos. Absolute chaos. It's a terrible situation. And I'd just like to mention one point, is that it wasn't the Catalonian police. It was the Guardia Civil and the others from mainland Spain that Rajoy sent up. And in fact, the Barcelona police were very staid and very polite. They didn't get into the violence. And it even got to the point when the Barcelona firemen came into Barcelona, and they were standing there protecting the people. And it was an absolute disgrace, a terrible, terrible disgrace. And of course,
Dennis, why will the European Union not condemn the Spanish government authorising its police to behave in this way?
Oh, it's very simple, and no one seems to have mentioned it today on the radio, is that the Catalonia leader has been trying for just over a year now to talk to Rajoy and to rebalance the tax situation so that the major earner, Catalonia, received a little more tax back. But of course, Rajoy doesn't want to do that because he's scared that Catalonia might vote to get out. So he refused to meet the Catalonian leader, and he left them with no choice but to take the vote. And the reason Rajoy does that is because he does what Merkel tells him. And in Catalonia and in north of Spain, everybody knows that since it was discovered a year or so ago by the Spanish press that Rajoy has 22 million euros in a Swiss bank account. And
is that absolutely true, Dennis, or is that just I mean, Dennis, let's just say allegedly, shall we? Let's just say allegedly. But Dennis, let me ask you one more question, if I can. Since Sunday, and since that level of violence, do you think there'll be more people minded towards Catalan independence because of that behaviour?
Rajoy has sealed the deal, yes. There will be independence now. The people are more than determined. There will be. And they are being backed by people in Spain who otherwise would have objected. But the performance
Dennis, you've made some great points, Dennis. Your line is going very bandy, but that was good. That was some real sort of testimony from what Dennis saw there on the ground. I get by text, hi Nigel, totally agree with you. I was absolutely disgusted with the Spanish police beating people with batons. I was horrified, says Anne in Blackburn. I get by Twitter, I never liked listening to you before on LBC, but after what you said today, you are my new hero. Well, that's incredibly sweet of you. Thank you. And I'm going to go to Susan in Wembley. Susan, what's your view? I mean, was I right or wrong to attack Juncker the way I did for ignoring and refusing to condemn that violence?
Hi, Nigel. First of all, you were absolutely right to condemn what happened. That was disgusting. But I really have 2 points to make. I'm originally from Latvia, and when we had our independence to claim and fight, that was like 91, 89. Catalans stood with us in the Baltic Way. They were there for the barricades. They helped us. The independence anthem that they are singing now is actually a Latvian song. And they did a Catalan way in 2013 that was helped organized by Latvian people. And I'm disgusted that Latvian Prime Minister nor the President said anything. They completely sold out to the bigger power. Completely. How can you forget something that happened when I was 4? I was there with them. So that was absolutely disgusting. And the second point...
Well, Susan, I'd never ever heard that before, that Latvian Catalonian link. So that's fascinating. And your second point, quickly if you can.
Yeah, second point is Catalonia needs to become independent, that they need to do it now, and European Union will do absolutely nothing about that. And I tell you why, because they won't throw out one of the best economies out of European Union, because all the South is struggling. If you look at Spain, if you look at Italy, Catalonia is good economically. Secondly, if they say you're out, if you're out, that means you just said, oh, that's an independent state then. You just admitted they're independent.
Well, do you know what? Do you know what, Susan? The Brexit Club maybe is about to get a little bit bigger. Listen, thank you very much for that fascinating call. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC, live from the European Parliament in Strasbourg, and it's 7:46. I've had a real go at Jean-Claude Juncker today. He tried to ignore the violence that Spanish police used against people trying to vote in Catalonia on Sunday. 850 of them wounded, some of them quite seriously. So I'm asking you, am I right or wrong about that? But before we return to that, and it's been great to take phone calls from Spain and from Spanish people, indeed, living in the UK. But before I get to that, we've got 2 more days to go of the online auction. As you know, I'm asking you to bid to come and have a lunch with me. It'll be on a Friday afternoon when I'm not broadcasting. It'll be at Franco's Italian restaurant in the centre of London, and tremendous it is, and thank you to them for providing this. We're doing it for Global Radio's Make Some Noise, and the idea is to help youngsters and their families living with illness, disability, or a lack of opportunity. To bid for this prize, to come and have lunch with me, and hopefully a fun afternoon, go to lbc.co.uk. These bids are open now. It closes at 7:45 on Thursday, 5th of October this week. You've got to be 18 to enter, and by going to lbc.co.uk, you can read the all-important terms and conditions. That is now at £4,100. So if that's too much for you, something else that may be in your price range is you can, if you want, on Wednesday, the 10th of January, come to the Hippodrome Casino in London. I'll be appearing on stage there. Again, I'll be doing it for Global Radio's Make Some Noise. And again, go to lbc.co.uk. Tickets start from £85. I'm going to go to Mike next. Mike in Leatherhead, who's never called us before. How do you feel about this, Mike? Was I right to have a go at Juncker?
Well, I don't think you are right. I just think that you've been a little bit partial or impartial in a way. But before I got 2 points to make here. I got a point and a question to ask you. Before I can make a point, I want to ask the question. Can you tell us? Yeah, can you tell us which part of the European Union law or constitution that says that they should intervene in internal affairs? That's the first question. Secondly, I want to know that I want to ask because there are things that I've seen and I've seen going on in this country. Before the referendum and after the referendum, there were some Polish people killed, even beaten, and the European Union did not intervene. But I did not hear you challenging the European Union to intervene. I did not hear you coming on radio to say why is it that British people are killing the Polish people. But now you are coming out to condemn the European Union.
Hang on, Mike. The point of the European Union Commission is that as we're members of the European Union, through a treaty, the European Commission are the guardians of the treaty. And the European Union puts itself up to be, in its own treaties, as a peaceful, democratic union. Now, the point, Mike, is whether it's Hungary, whether it's Poland, whoever it is, if the European Union are not happy with the way a member state government is behaving, Mr. Juncker always says so. And he does it here in Strasbourg once a month at the big get-togethers. And what I'm saying is he has literally turned a Nelsonian blind eye today to something that has seriously injured 850 people. And frankly, it's completely hypocritical to have a go at the Hungarians for not going along with migration targets and to ignore this. Does that point make sense?
Listen, no, it doesn't make sense. What I've noticed when people ask you a question when you know it's very tough for you, you come in and start making stories and start to lie like as usual. My question to you is, can you tell us?
What?
Listen, my question, I'm going to say it again. I said when you be asked a question and the question is very tough, you come out to make stories and start to lie. My question to you is this. Can you tell us which part of the European Union constitution that says they get a right to intervene in our internal affairs? Tell us which part of the constitution that says that.
Well, the whole point, Mike, about the European Union is that you are signed up to a higher order. Their law is supreme over yours. The European Commission are the government of Europe, whether you like it or not. I recognised that many, many years ago. Nigel Farage is complaining that the European Union isn't getting involved with the business of a sovereign state. Double standards. No, I'm making the point that Mr. Juncker always interferes in the affairs of member states. But when a member state uses violence against its own people, but because Mr. Juncker and the Commission don't want Catalonian separation, they don't want the Brexit process to continue, they simply ignore it. I would suggest that's his double standard, not mine. I wonder what Nick in Hitchin thinks. Nick, good evening.
Well, I'd like to reinforce that last caller, actually. I don't think it's a question of you being right or wrong. I think you're wrong about everything, really. So this is just another pimple on the same butter, really. But I think you're...
It doesn't sound like, Nick, we're going to get a very reasoned argument here, does it? I mean, am I wrong with which football club I support or beer I drink? Everything's wrong, is it?
Well, to me, yes, everything is wrong. But quite frankly, on this issue,
right.
I think you're just being downright hypocritical yourself. Your main mantra, one of your main reasons for the United Kingdom pulling out of the European Union is so it can make its own laws and have its own sovereignty, actually, which we both do, which we have got now anyway. Now, here we have a domestic internal political problem within a member state of the EU. Whichever way you put it, it is a domestic internal problem. Catalan versus the government in Madrid. Now you're complaining that the EU is not intervening, or that Juncker just had a petty go at Juncker. So what is your problem?
Well, actually, Nick, the EU is interfering because it's making a series of statements where it says there should be unity, stability, not division and fragmentation. So the European Union is giving a very strong view. It is interfering. It's saying, how dare you, Catalonians, express an opinion, don't go for independence, we won't let you do it. If you do, we'll try and punish you, as we're trying to do with the Brits over Brexit. So what I'm saying, Nick, is they've interfered. My point is they've refused to condemn the violence. Is that not a justifiable view?
It hasn't, but the EU hasn't made that intervention whatsoever. It is the Spanish government that is saying, they are breaking the law. They were breaking the law. It doesn't matter what the violence was. The violence was terrible.
Really? Good. Well, thank God for that.
So, but this was a Spanish internal problem. Now you're complaining that the EU is not intervening in the sovereign affairs of a sovereign country. So
let me repeat, Nick. I'm not complaining. They're not interfering or commenting. They are commenting. They're saying fragmentation is unacceptable. What they are not doing with their intervention is condemning the violence that has been used. And I think that is appalling. And I've quickly got time for one last caller, another Nick, who's calling from North Finchley, never called the show before. Nick, what do you think about what happened in Catalonia on Sunday?
Good evening, Nigel.
Good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. My ex is Spanish. She comes from a little village near Zaragoza, in Zaragoza. And through her, I got really interested in the Spanish Civil War. And feeling still on deep with Catalonia. Catalonia decided to go on the side of Franco automatically. And if you go up to a place called Cercedilla on the train, you can still see the huge cross dedicated to Franco and the troops. It's impossible to the Spanish government to let Catalonia have its independence, because that will create a domino effect with Galicia, the Basque Country, and all that sort of thing. Although I agree 100% with Brexit, to be honest with you, Nigel, I really do, but I have to understand the Spanish government that they cannot allow Catalonia to have its independence. They go two-sided. I mean, I've been to a place called Ceuta and Melilla, which is Spanish enclaves in Morocco. And when I hear the Spanish government say about Gibraltar, I take great joy in phoning my ex and mention Ceuta and Melilla.
No. Nick, as you say, they can't allow it to happen. They won't allow it to happen, and any means appear to be justifiable. I've got to end it there. I thank you. I'm going to give the last comment to Michael, who responded to Sir Alan Duncan. He said, I'd like to apologise to the Europe Minister, Sir Alan Duncan, for being an impudent, non-habitual voter with the temerity to want to live in a country that makes its own decisions. He has got to go as Europe Minister. You've been listening to the Nigel Farage Show on LBC. I'm back tomorrow at 7. Coming up at 10, it's Ian Collins. But up next is Clive Bull.
Nigel, thank you. Coming up between now and 10 at 9, it's the Health Hour.